Okay, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Ludus Press's coverage of E3 2016. As always, I am your host, Seth Gollivan, and this year, hopefully, I will be joined by more people than last year. If not, though, we will have another fun year of me talking to myself all about the great games that are on display at this year's Electronic 3. So, before we go any further, hopefully this is the last year I'll be using this old computer, and by this time next year I'll have something that is custom built for a great streaming experience. But until then, bear with me for one more year of iffy quality as I work towards a new custom built computer. And now, let us begin. So, E3 this year is going to be mostly the same as previous years. There's going to be one big difference in that a E3 press conference stalwart, Nintendo, has decided not to hold a press conference this year. And because of that, I can't watch it, and I can't comment on it, because it doesn't exist. And I have to imagine that their lack of a press conference has a lot to do with the death of former CEO Satoru Iwata, who has hosted Nintendo's E3 press conferences for a very, very long time, and for the past couple of years has held their Nintendo Direct videos that they have done in place of press conferences that have always been really fun. And I'm going to miss seeing his Direct videos. I always thought they were the thing that every company should be doing at E3 these days. The whole concept of a live show in the modern age that's held on a stage and such has always been pretty ridiculous to me. And I always thought that for all of the backwards policies at Nintendo, they actually nailed the era of the connected online E3 better than any other company. So, I'm going to miss their absence this year. They are doing a stream from their Treehouse staff being their North American translation staff, and that stream will contain footage from the new Zelda and from a handful of upcoming 3DS and Wii U titles that are already available in Japan, but that are now on their way to the US, including the game that crosses the Shin Megami Tensei universe from Atlas and the Fire Emblem series from Intelligent Systems. But other than that, I believe it is going to be mostly focused on Zelda. Nintendo has confirmed that there is no news for their new console coming from E3 this year. They have said that it will launch next year, and in the first half of the year even, but for whatever reason, they still are not ready to show what they have. And considering how badly they botched the reveal of the Wii U, maybe that is a smart choice. Maybe they should wait until they're absolutely certain they have their messaging really clear, really solid. Make sure that they have the actual launch games that they're going to actually have ready on display. And so, maybe they're just trying to play it close to the chest till they're really certain about everything, and then they'll reveal it all very shortly before launch. But, it's a pretty risky bet. Probably the closest analogy I can come to for a previous system would be Sega's Saturn launch. They announced the system at, I believe, it might have been before E3. It might have been at CES, and then launched it that day. It was a surprise immediate launch of a console, and the Saturn was a complete. Hold on. I want to make sure. Okay, sorry. It said we were not receiving data, so I wanted to make sure that we're good. Still looks like we're good. Okay. Let me just check for 1 second before I continue. I believe it might have been before E. Okay, looks like we're still good. Continuing on. So the Saturn. Yes, so the Saturn was a big disaster for Sega and started their actual downfall in the console market. So it's an issue if you launch your console too soon after announcing it, just because you can get in a situation where you can't build up enough hype and you don't sell enough units at launch to really get people excited about the system, and that just spirals into a really terrible situation. So I hope Nintendo knows what it's doing. This is the first console launched in the post-Iwata era, so there's definitely some worry that Nintendo might lose its way or something like that. And hopefully that wouldn't happen, but that's where Nintendo is. So, what do we have? Well, today, in about an hour, EA will be holding the first press conference of the year. It's called EA Play. I'm just going to go through each of the press conferences that they are going to have and talk a little bit about what I'm looking forward to seeing, what I hope to see, and what I don't think we'll see. So, starting with EA, the confirmed things we are going to see are sports games, including Madden and FIFA, of course, and maybe NHL. And then, from their more core studios, we have Titanfall 2, which a leak recently revealed they'll be showing off the single-player campaign, of which there wasn't one in the first one, so that's pretty cool. And Battlefield 1, which is Battlefield set during World War I, which I think is a very interesting direction for the series to go. World War I is a very, very violent, very brutal war, and it's really difficult to make good World War I games because the weapons are, in a lot of cases, not very accurate, not very quick firing. There's a very large evolution of weapons technology over the course of the war, as you go from basically 19th century or 18th century warfare into the 19th century to 20th century warfare, and it's an interesting evolution to play through in a single-player campaign, I guess, if you want to set it over the course of the entire war and set it on a lot of different fronts and show just how vastly different certain early parts of the war are to certain later parts of the war, where you're fighting, with horses and sabers in Africa, and at the beginning of the war, and by the end you have tanks and you have planes in Europe, and there's a very interesting dichotomy as the times really changed and modern combat techniques and tactics set in. You had your first machine gun usage, like heavy machine gun usage. There was a little bit of machine gun usage in earlier wars, but you had very heavy machine gun nest usage in World War I for the first time, and that led to trench warfare, and you had a ton of other cool things. Hold on for 1 second, folks. I think we might have... Okay, Matt is going to join us, and then we will continue on. So hold on 1 second. I'm getting Matt into our talk. You there, Matt?
Yeah.
You are very, very quiet.
Damn. Am I speaking up loud enough now?
Nope, nowhere close.
Test my mic volume.
Hmm. Let's see if I can raise you up somehow. 'Cause I can't hear you barely at all. Audio settings.
My mic is at max.
Hmm. Try now.
Is this better?
Nope. Hmm. How can I not hear you? Wonder if my speakers are set very quietly. Try talking now.
Is this better?
No. I don't think it's on my end. What do you have your microphone set to in your Windows settings? Your microphone set to in your Windows settings. I sound very loud.
Do I sound loud enough now?
Nope. Trying to see what else could be causing this. Turning to Skype. Call. Conversation. Options. Audio setting. I think I know what's wrong. No, never mind. I was wrong. Hmm. Got anything?
Here we go. I turned it all the way up. Is this better?
Nope.
Why is it okay? It's showing it's all the way in the low end. Ugh.
I'm trying to think what else you could need to change. So in your recording devices, your microphone is set to max.
Is this better?
Nope. Okay, I have an idea of how to check something at least. Go into your microphone properties and try to listen to your device and then talk and see if you hear how quiet you sound.
Yeah, I just checked on Skype and it's low.
Gotcha. Hmm.
Wizard could not start.
Well, and in Skype, the audio settings, your microphone's set to highest.
I'm using the Razer TMF 7.1.
Okay. In Skype audio settings, do you have it set to automatically adjust your microphone settings?
Let me check. Where would I find that?
In Skype, under options, which is under call, I believe. Let's see. Um, no, it's under conversation. Where did I literally just saw it.
I went to automatically adjust microphone settings. Yeah. And audio settings?
Yes. Okay. Is it set to automatically adjust? You can try checking that and unchecking it and see if that fixes it. And when you uncheck it, if you set it to the absolute highest setting, then that will give it the most sound Skype can get. I'm going to continue on with my spiel while you work on this. Are you talking at all now? Because I can't hear you at all. Okay, guys. When Matt is done figuring that out, he'll join us as well. He's figuring out his microphone. Meanwhile, we'll continue on with what we were talking about, which was EA, and World War One, and Battlefield One, which I was saying is a horrible war, and I'm interested to see how EA does it. Kind of, it's interesting in a couple ways. One, World War One, in addition to all the horrible combat scene there, it was not an American war really. America was only in it for a couple months, I believe. I don't even think a full year, and so we have a Battlefield game which, in theory, would not focus on the United States at all, which would be new for a Battlefield game and quite refreshing, honestly. World War One was mainly a war between France and Germany, um, and there was also English involvement, and it all basically spiraled out of control due to various alliances between different European states and their various colonies and so on, and that's how it became a world war. But at its core, World War One is a war between France, Germany, and it's a continuation of sorts of the Franco-Prussian War that had occurred, I believe, about 40 years earlier, and which itself was just a continuation of a war that France and Germany have been fighting since Charlemagne, post the fall of the Roman Empire. So for nearly 1,000 years, they've been fighting over this tract of land that was initially controlled by one of Charlemagne's sons, who died, and his other sons. One was in control of the Prussian Empire, which is now Germany, and one was in control of the French Empire, which is now France. And they both fought over control of the tract of land that was controlled by Charlemagne's third son, who died, and they've literally been fighting about it for 1,000 years. And World War One was just the final battle of sorts of that. You could even argue, honestly, that World War Two at least began as the final battle for that area. Um, but that's your history of what World War One is. So it has almost nothing to do with the United States and very little to do with England. Uh, it's a war very much focused on France and Germany. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see, at least for the single player portion, what their focus is, as previous Battlefield games and most historical war games have focused on some war that has either British or American involvement. And while World War One does have British and American involvement, their involvement is very minor compared to the involvement of. Hold on one second. Very minor compared to the involvement of America and Britain in World War II and in the Vietnam War, which is another common one, or of course the American Civil War, which had no British involvement but heavy. It was exclusively American involvement. So World War One, not a very commonly adapted war in video games, I think, in large part because of its absolutely horrendous. Hey.
Is this working better?
Oh my god, now you're super loud.
Oh, okay. I'll try to talk a bit loud, a bit softer. I switched from my Razer TMAT 7.1 to my Logitech webcam C something.
Okay. Can you turn the volume down on that a little?
This better?
Yes. Perfect. Awesome.
Okay, cool.
Did you hear my World War One spiel?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of it?
I think it's interesting, except for the fact that the British did have a lot more involvement in it, and in the early, we got into the war right at the time as the Russians got out of it.
Yeah.
So there was also a big Russian presence in there. The United States was only in there for the last year.
Well,
there was also the fact that Turkey and Italy were both involved.
Yes. But I mean, the interesting thing always about World War One to me is just that, at its core, World War One is just the final straw in the Franco-Prussian conflict that had been going on since Charlemagne.
Which is true. It actually, well, World War II technically was, but
yeah. World War II, it's kind of a technical thing because Hitler didn't really care about ending that conflict. He was just
actually he did. If you read Mein Kampf, a lot of it is talking about how the French need to be paid back.
Right. Well, he wanted to pay them back for their actions after World War One.
Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles.
Right. And the all the payments they made them, the reparations they made them pay, but it wasn't like specifically about that tract of land that all their other wars had been about. He just wanted to conquer the entire world and make them all pay. So you can argue that World War II was the final war of that conflict, or World War One, but either way, it's, I guess, the interesting thing about World War One and to then as an extension World War Two is that none of it would have happened if Charlemagne had not had that third son.
Well, there's also the fact that it was also that when you get into alliances, and the way that the war was also being fought over who has the most colonial territory, and it was
Right.
a matter of the colonial powers warring against each other. Since you don't need to fight in the colonies, you can just fight the other guy in their
Right.
homeland, and then take all of their land across the globe.
Right.
And that played into the big rival because Germany had an alliance with Turkey, and the French had an alliance with the British Empire.
Right.
You had Britain wanting to go to war with Turkey over a lot of territory in the Middle East.
Right.
And that played into the Great Game, where it was Britain, Turkey, and Persia fighting over places like Afghanistan.
Right. Which, looking back on it, it's a pretty silly place to be fighting over, but
Yeah, you can't, because in Afghanistan, nobody ultimately gains control of the whole country.
that is true, and also it's Afghanistan, it's just a desert. Why would you possibly want to control that part of the world?
Well, it's not a desert; it's just harsh mountain land.
Again, why would you possibly want to control that?
Well, now it's because there's a lot of platinum there that's used for constructing electronics.
Okay, but this was World War One we're talking about.
At that point, it was just for bragging rights.
Exactly.
It was called the Great Game because it's a game that nobody could win. If you have like four colonial powers, with the Russians eventually just stopped trying to fight the British over it,
Yeah.
and they both thought that they could take on like Turkey and Persia, and now to get control of it. And what happened is that World War One was the final conflict, was also Britain and Turkey trying to be like, okay, one of us is going to be able to get Afghanistan, and we're also going to be able to take Arabia from Turkey. And the aftermath of World War One is what caused the birth of modern day Saudi Arabia.
Right. It's I guess the kind of the beyond not having much of any American involvement in World War One is also the fact that there's no real villain. Everyone is being an asshole in World War One.
Which is true. There's no real good guy. The war was entirely fought over colonial territory.
Right. So it's like it's hard to make a hero in a war where it's a bunch of rich, powerful people sending a bunch of poor peasants to kill each other for no reason other than they want to have the biggest dick.
Yep.
So,
Well, at the same time, it means that there's no playing as the bad guy either.
that is true, but when you like, it's what it worries me because this is EA we're talking about, and their history of making layered, complex war narratives is non-existent. And
Well,
also, you have a studio based in Sweden, which did Sweden take much part in World War One? I don't think.
I don't think they did.
So you
I thought
don't
they sat out the Second World War.
right, like Scandinavian nations were not a huge part of the world wars. So that
No, they were neutral throughout the whole thing, just like they were. I just googled it. They were neutral in
Right.
World War One because they didn't wind up getting into another conflict like the Napoleonic Wars, which was a previous conflict between France and Germany, where it was basically Napoleon
it was a previous it was a previous battle for that tract of land.
Yeah, and it was basically Napoleon making all the same mistakes that Hitler would later repeat by
Yep.
pissing off Britain and Russia at the same time, and
Yep.
he also invaded Germany, he invaded Spain,
Yes.
and wound up
In all honesty, Hitler did a much better job of it than Napoleon did, but also on the same token, Hitler had much more extensive and modern resources to work with.
Well, that's debatable. Napoleon was actually pretty successful, and he got about as far as Hitler did. And he
He
also,
didn't get as far into Russia as Hitler did.
well, true, but
I mean, they both conquered most of mainland Europe, so. But the difference is that with the addition of cars and trains, Hitler got much further into Russia before winter hit.
mhm.
And also, Napoleon wasn't an ally with Italy, right?
I'm not sure if he was.
I mean, the main flaw in Hitler's plan was that Italy failed in its North African campaign.
Yeah, the whole.
But this is a historical talk that it was not meant to go on quite this long. But the whole interesting thing is that, like, with World War One, telling a story about World War One, you're telling a story that if you try to tell it on a national level, no one looks like the good guy. Everyone looks bad. The focus is on two non-English speaking countries. And you do have England. Like, England is involved, but it's not the focal point is in mainland Europe, not in England. And England is being brought on because they are an ally to the main aggressors in the conflict. So,
So,
it will be interesting to me to see, are we going to be playing as French and German soldiers,
I
or
hope, or I also hope that we get multiple different countries
yeah, because I
the
think
same way as 1942 did.
I think it would be really interesting to show the difference between how the war was fought in, say, modern day Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and such, where you have a lot of horseback and camel fighting with sabers and single shot rifles, and then showing the war on the European front between France and Germany, where it's this exact same time period going on at the same time, but you have tanks and planes.
Hmm.
And it's a very interesting war in
Well,
that
there's also
sense.
this was the war. This was the war that, in the aftermath of it, the League of Nations banned weapons of mass destruction
Right. Yes.
because
You
you had
had your
chemical weapons
yeah. You had your
like
first
mustard
use of
gas.
chemical weapons there. You had your first heavy use of machine gun nests in World War One, and so you had a lot of really interesting. Well, interesting. You had a lot of really horrendous and terrible new weapons being deployed on the European front, especially, and it makes for just some really awful stuff. And, like, the worry for me again is we're talking about a publisher who does not have a very good history, being very subtle, and a developer who has no personal history with the war, and that makes it, it's worrisome for me of how well they can get into the very gray morals of World War One.
Well, you could try to play up, just go brutal with it and play it up, because when all was over, torture and cannibalism were the only two expedients that the civilized scientific Christian states had been able to deny themselves, and
Right.
those were of doubtful utility.
I guess my worry
You know
when you
who I
do
just
that
quoted,
is,
right?
hmm.
That was a quote from Churchill on World War One.
Yeah. Well, Churchill was a smart man. Um, I guess my worry if EA were to try to go the more extreme route is we get something like the first home front, where they just go too far. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what they do, but I'm not very hopeful because EA just doesn't have a very good history with this type of stuff. It honestly almost makes me wish they had some BioWare writers coming in to work on it.
Well, BioWare is EA.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
It's EA Dice. It's just EA Dice, and EA Dice.
Right. It's
I think
just
with
that.
Battlefield 3 and 4, those were definitely pro-American, anti-Russian.
Yes. And they were very jingoistic. They were very not subtle at all. Like, they were just poorly written, period. So, I don't know. It's just worrisome to me to see this specific studio taking on a war that is as morally ambiguous as this one. On the same token, I think it provides really interesting potential for multiplayer because
Yeah,
you do
because then
have
nobody feels like the bad guy.
that, and like I said, you have such differing technological levels of different nations. And at different periods, like over the course of the war, we see such massive weapon development that I actually think that could make for a really interesting mode. If I don't know how exactly you do it, but basically start out with early World War One weaponry, and by the end of the match, have late World War One weaponry.
Or it could also depend on the map.
It could too, but I think it would be a really fun mode if you took the World War One weaponry, the early World War One weaponry, and like I think of it like leveling up over the course of a match, except instead of getting more powerful, you get more modern weaponry as time goes on. I'm bringing Calvin in, okay?
Sure.
He can add his knowledge. I don't know if he knows anything about World War One. You there, Calvin?
Yes, here I am.
We are talking about World War One and Battlefield
Okay.
One. And I was just saying how I think it would be really interesting to have a multiplayer mode where they start with early World War One era weapons, single shot rifles and sabers and such, and riding on cavalry charges, and have a mode that basically shows the evolution of combat throughout the war.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the end, you're getting planes, you're getting tanks, you're getting mustard gas, you're getting machine gun nests, and it's like it's almost two entirely different wars when you look at the beginning and the end, and you look
Right.
at the colonial front and you look at the European front.
Well, that's the thing about World War One is that I don't actually think it makes for a very good video game because it's not really fun to use those kinds of weapons. It's not what we're used to in a video game.
That's the
Well,
other
it's going to be about long range combat because it's all
Right.
going to be trench warfare. It's going to be more of a game about sniping.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Okay.
And then, of course, if one guy gets a shotgun or a submachine gun, and then just decides to charge into the trench while everybody's trying to snipe, he just causes a ton of damage and takes your control point.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's going to be about, and that's why when you go into like the no man's land in between the trenches, what you do is you try to like fire mortars and mustard gas in there to keep people from crossing over.
Right.
It's just such a brutal war. I just
Yeah.
I that's the other issue for me. Is just like there's nothing good that came out of World War One. It was a horrible, horrible, pointless war,
Uh-huh.
and to make a game around it, honestly, it's not like it doesn't feel good to play through a war in which everyone is the villain and no one wins.
That's one of the things that I had thought about when I first heard about this announcement. I was thinking to myself, well, they could actually make something with a really compelling story, something really interesting, because it's something that really calls into question the whole morality of warfare in general, because a lot of video games up to this point
Right.
have pretty much painted the United States and its allies as the benevolent heroes of humanity.
Right.
But
That's the other interesting thing with World War One is that the United States is only in it for a very, very short time at the very end,
mhm.
and had very little combat like experience in it at all. So you can't really have an American hero.
Right.
And
And
But
then,
yeah-
of course, when you get in, the other thing that matters is that over on the home front, you had Woodrow Wilson going after draft dodgers, and then, of course, he was also drumming up anti-German sentiment within the home front, within
Right.
U.S. soil. So
he was
not-
trying. He had the unfortunate fact that no one tried to bomb Pearl Harbor on him, so he didn't succeed quite as quickly as FDR did.
he also did jail journalists who dissented, who were against the war. He also segregated the federal government, including the armed forces, until the Truman years.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where like every country looks bad in World War One. Every
Yep.
country did horrible things for no reason whatsoever.
And the only reason why we got in was over something where Germany tried and failed at trying to get Mexico to distract us, and Wilson saw that as a choice to join the Allied powers because they were winning, and he just wanted to be on the winning side in a shameless land grab.
Right. It doesn't look good for anyone. It really doesn't. It looks awful. Every single country comes out looking worse by the end of World War One.
Well, like you said, everybody is the bad guy.
Right. And it's just what I've been saying to Matt is that I just don't know that EA is the company to handle that type of story.
No, yeah, that's the thing that kept me from it. I was thinking, man, that if this had been given to, or I mean, not given to necessarily, but if this had been taken on by a more socially conscious developer or publisher, or someone who
Did you guys play the Ubisoft puzzle game set in World War One, the 2D puzzle platformer thing?
Yeah, Valiant Hearts. I think it's called. You know what? I actually have that, but I have not played it.
That is a really great look at World War One that basically tells it from the perspective of soldiers who are drafted and don't want to be there and who are fighting, their friends and neighbors. And it's a really brilliantly told story about the absolutely horrifying nature of World War One, where everyone looks bad. But they have the advantage. That's a French company telling a story about a war that was, originated between France and Germany. So it just felt a lot more honest and sincere.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I was wondering. I don't think they're going to do this, but I'm wondering if they're going to include a part in the game about the soccer match on Christmas Day between Germany and the U.S.
Yeah, that would be an it would be an interesting ending to the story mode to have that conclusion, because it is a famous story. And
right. Well, the thing is, though, but here's what I was thinking is that if they did include that, then it would really put a bullet point on just how stupid and pointless not only this war but all wars are.
Right.
Most warfare, I guess I should say.
Well, you could also argue that the aftermath of World War One, I think, was also just as interesting as the actual war. In particular,
absolutely.
Ataturk forming the modern state of Turkey and ending the caliphate, which was gone until Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi reestablished Daesh as the new caliph and decided to use them as a platform for attacking the entire rest of the world.
Right. Yeah. No. There's a lot of really essentially, you can say that the entirety of modern politics sort of began with World War One.
Yeah, and then there was also British Mandatory Palestine, which is where that was given over to the Palestinians, but still as a British colony. And then, of course, the Jews there were given no representation in Mandatory Palestine, and that started the Zionist movement.
Right. So
and then,
it really is you look at most modern politics and you can trace it back to the events of World War One.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was also the rise of the House of Saud, the Irish Civil War.
Right.
The Easter Rising would be an interesting expansion, actually.
So, yeah, I think there's so much potential there for interesting stories. I'm not sure a first-person shooter from DICE is the correct medium for them. So that's my issue with that. But I want to move on because EA is going to start soon, and I wanted to get through more than just talking about Battlefield 1. As interesting as World War 1 is, and as much as I do love talking about just how crazy it is that World War 1 has had such an effect, and that this stupid argument between Germany and France has basically shaped the entirety of politics for 1,000 years.
You mean 100 years?
No, 1,000, because if you really think about
Charlemagne,
it...
right.
I
I thought
go
you
all
were
the way
getting
back to Charlemagne, and it's just literally the entire world has been shaped by this argument between two brothers 1,000 years ago. You know,
Yeah.
it's just it's such an interesting way to look at history. But let's move on. This Titanfall 2 is also going to be shown. They just
did the single player
did a
trailer.
single player trailer. I'm glad there's a single player this time.
Well, single player last time was technically kind of existed. It was just everybody had to be playing campaign mode at the same time.
That's not single player. That's multiplayer.
That's
campaign.
multiplayer campaign. Yeah, PvP campaign. So I'm wondering exactly how they're going to incorporate a lot of the gameplay in Titanfall, like calling your Titan and that type of stuff into a single player campaign. And I'm hoping that since it's Respawn and they were ex-Infinity Ward guys, that it doesn't feel like Call of Duty where it's just go from point A to point B and it's all a number of scripted events, press X to not die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually...
If you try to explore the level, you automatically die. That kind of stuff.
Specifically because you have Titans, my big hope is that they design the levels in such a way where you can use a Titan at all points, or at any point, that they don't restrict when you can call in Titan support.
Yeah, as long as they open up the level and don't make it feel like if you're on rails, and if you try to get off the rails and actually try to be like, oh, I want to check out what's in this room, you automatically die because you hit a wall because it's made by the Call of Duty devs.
Right.
I just want to see like Doom and Shadow Warrior, how you do a single player FPS. Mm-hmm. Those games were great.
Was Titanfall even that successful?
It was decently successful financially. You mean?
Well, I mean, I understand that it got pretty good reviews, but I didn't think that it had that that long of a lifespan, because by the time Destiny came out, a lot of people had switched over, I think, and everybody that I had heard from who was on the Titanfall sort of trail, they kind of abandoned it and didn't really look back.
Yeah, I don't think it had a ton of longevity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You could argue a lot of reasons why that is, but I think it was successful enough that making a second one was warranted, and hopefully they can fix some of the issues with the multiplayer longevity in addition to adding a campaign.
Or do you think they already had it planned, and because I see, and now I'm forgetting how long Titanfall came out. How long ago? Was it like 2 years? Maybe.
Yeah, it's about 2 years.
I mean, is that enough time to develop a sequel to that game from? I guess you're not from scratch, because they're probably reusing a lot of the same code. They're using the same engine. Did they plan on this becoming a...
I think they did plan on it becoming a series. As far as whether or not they're reusing the same engine, I don't... That would be an interesting question, because they were using Source the first time around.
Mm.
And that engine is old. It's very, very old. And Valve already released Source 2 in between then and now.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they moved it all to a new engine. And
I also wouldn't be surprised if they moved it to a new engine, because Valve and EA are not on good terms.
They're not. They're actually not on bad terms.
Well, EA created Origin just because they were tired of Valve getting a ton of money off DLC sales.
I mean, that is true, but EA also publishes Valve's physical copies of their games.
Well, have they published a physical game since Portal 2?
No, but they have published, EA published both Left 4 Dead's and both the Orange Box and Portal 2, so...
Right, but that was a long time ago. That was pre-Origin.
No, not Portal 2. Portal 2 was post-Origin.
Portal 2 was post-Origin?
Sure was. It's one of those things where people assume Valve and EA hate each other because they have a competing service, but they actually don't. I mean, it's a business. They have a competing service, but they still, as far as the physical publishing business goes, they still work together regularly. So,
anyway.
Yeah.
What else has EA got on the docket?
Those are the outside of sports games, those are the only two confirmed things. I have to assume Mass Effect Andromeda is going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much about that. And BioWare's also supposedly working on a new IP and has been for like 3 or 4 years now.
Well, do you think we're going to see any? Because EA is handling Star Wars now too,
Yes, that is true
right?
as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So is there
I
anything that
hope
we're
that
going to
it's
see
not
from
as
that?
bad as Battlefront 3, because Battlefront 3 took away everything that I loved about Battlefront 2.
Well, I think it's too early to see more Battlefront. I think that's probably next E3.
But
I do think we could see the stuff that Amy Hennig is working on in Canada.
Do you think are they going to show? Are they going to update or add anything to the existing Battlefront?
I would bet
'Cause I-
not, just because if they plan to have a new one out next year already, they got to be working on the new one by now.
Yeah.
I mean, because they also are working on, like, that's the same studio that's doing Mirror's Edge and just finished Mirror's Edge and now has, Battlefield 1 as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't imagine that they have too much more planned for the current edition of Battlefront, because that would just be like a ridiculous amount of things for a single studio to work on.
Oh, that's a shame. That's such a shame about that game.
It was a good foundation. So
Yeah.
I think that's really, when you look at like what games that turn into successful franchises, it's often when you have a good foundation the first time around. And you look at Assassin's Creed or just really any number of first entries in a franchise that are also the developer's first game on a new console. Look at Titanfall too. I mean,
Yeah.
you really need to focus the first time around on nailing that core gameplay, the core identity of what the series is going to be, and then second time around you can actually put all the content in.
But here's the question, though: is Star Wars Battlefront the first entry in that series? Because it's still taking the existing IP that had originated with Pandemic.
I consider it the first entry in the series in the sense that everything had to be built from scratch.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
So,
and I also think that they wound up doing a lot of things differently from Battlefront 2, which I thought was not broken and didn't need to be fixed.
right. I think the issue with trying to just do another Battlefront 2 was that a key thing that made Battlefront 2 so beloved was just the sheer breadth of content there, and that just wasn't going to be possible for them to hit their release date.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that it was a holiday rush. It was kind of like...
more than a holiday rush. It was, I need to get this out in time for the movie rush.
Right, that too.
Yeah, it was just like Knights of the Old Republic 2, where there was a lot of cut content that's now just being restored. That was on disc anyway.
But the good thing was that it sold something like 15 million copies for them, so they're making a sequel, and so you have to assume that the sequel will vastly expand upon the original.
Well, I hope that they bring back things like they bring back campaign mode, that they let you choose your class, that they bring back classes, that they make it so that sniper rifles are actually a weapon class and not something that you spawn with, that you get like a pistol as a sidearm, that you basically you have to reload again.
Right, yeah.
Basically everything that was in Battlefront 2 that didn't make it into Battlefront 3. Same thing with a lot of the levels being a bit more open, the levels being larger.
I think, definitely I can see them bringing back at least the what was the mode where you're like fighting over the galaxy, the two sides?
Galactic Conquest.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that they're probably going to add into it.
And then, of course, space battles need to make a return.
Right, yeah, and space battles, I think. I think there are a bunch of things like, not necessarily, I don't know, I don't know how the general public received things like sniper rifles and that type of stuff, and the lack of classes, whether that was liked or not. But I think there's, as far as the actual cut modes and cut content, I have to think that they're going to include that next time around.
Yeah, I think that basically what they should do is ask themselves, what did Pandemic do when they made Battlefront 1 and 2, and how do we get that back? Same thing with space battles, boarding ships.
Right.
Old Republic era.
I think the other issue The issue with space battles might be a technical one, honestly.
Well, they
You don't
pulled it
think
off
the
then.
engine?
I think the engine could. I don't know if a Xbox One is capable of streaming that at quick enough speeds.
They were able to on the original Xbox, so I don't see why they couldn't do it on an Xbox One.
Well, you could if you lowered the graphical quality of everything, but I feel like that was a really big selling point, was how close it looked to the films. And you know how angry people are going to get if there is a graphical downgrade for the sequel. Like that is going to be a shit show. Whatever happens, it cannot look worse.
Well, I can argue, which is, it's EA. People will hate everything they do just because they're EA.
I know, but as a marketer, no executive is ever going to greenlight a project that will have to downgrade the graphics from the previous version to get new features in. Whether or not that's the right choice, I don't know, but I can tell you from a business standpoint that doing that would be suicide.
Well, why don't they just lower the frame rate then?
The frame rate already is at 30. And they're already running at 720p, so they can't make it look like, from a resolution and frame rate standpoint, it can't go any lower on Xbox One than it is.
Here's what they do, all right? Here's what they need to do for that, right? They do maybe sacrifice the resolution of the textures, the number of polygons, whatever, and then what they need to do is say that they're emulating the look and feel of the original trilogy as it was released in theaters in 1977.
Okay.
That's what they need to do for that.
Yeah, the low frame rate is meant to mimic the puppeteering of the original trilogy.
Right. There's a reason that the non-human creatures can only move their jaw up and down without actually forming letters with their lips.
Right. They're just puppets and claymation, guys.
Yeah.
It's purposeful.
Oh, here's what they do, right? They need to just say, okay, we're just gonna go on full on FMV. We're gonna blue screen everything.
Okay.
And that'll be your cutscenes and all of that stuff.
As great as all these ideas are, they're never gonna happen. And maybe they'll be able to do space battles. We'll see. I mean,
the space battles in Battlefront 2 didn't seem like they were all that big, to be honest. The actual
it's not that. It's that you have to. I don't know. It's an interesting feat of engine design because you have basically two maps going on, one on top of the other, and how do you do that, and how much of that can you do on a cloud computing side, and how much do you need to do on the client side? And it's a tough technical nut to crack, and I think if anyone can crack it, it's probably DICE, but it is a tough nut to crack. So
yeah, okay.
But
maybe it'll be DLC. Maybe they'll put it on a second disc. I don't know.
I don't think it's the size on the disc. I think it's the size you need to store in memory.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Xbox One uses just standard DDR3 memory, so it's not super fast to stream in and out. So that's really my issue, is you have to stream out one of these battlefields and then stream in another on the fly as someone's flying through space. And that's where the Xbox One, like, you could probably do it, but you'd have this, like, momentary freeze as you moved up into space. And for a multiplayer game, that's probably not going to work.
Well, wait. Well, yeah. Okay. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole.
We can talk more about all this after EA show because they're starting in just a couple minutes. So we need to wrap up our talk about EA so that we can actually watch the conference.
Now, where are you guys watching it? I'm on IGN's website here. Are they going to be?
I am going to watch it on YouTube. But IGN, GameSpot, Giant Bomb, everyone is streaming this. So, for anyone watching at home, you can go to virtually any gaming website you want, and they will probably have a stream of this. Or you can go to YouTube and.
Could they go to luduspress.com?
No, because I'm turning off our stream as soon as it starts. Because last time we ended up just with 2 hours of black screen and nothing.
Oh boy.
So, we're actually going to stop streaming. We can keep talking, we can stay on Skype, and we'll watch it, but everyone else, come back here after EA's conference is over, and we'll talk about what we thought of it. And they're going to begin any second now, so I'm going to stop the stream from now. There's a different page for our post-show stream, so everyone watching at home, come back in about an hour and a half is what their shows usually are. So,
All right, we'll see you in a little bit.
farewell, everyone.